Hey guys, it's Ben Reed with the Next Gen Sales Leader Podcast. I'm here with Devin Baptiste. He is the founder and CEO of GroupRaise. Welcome to the show, Devin.
Hey, it's awesome to be here. It's this is a fun catch up because we get to talk like this all the time in an unrecorded format. It's fun to hop on with you and just kind of connect together in this way.
So anybody who doesn't know Devin, Devin is one of the smartest people I know. He is one of the philosophical minds in business I respect. And I've been telling him he needs to create his own personal brand beyond the circle that he dominates in, which is the startup fundraising and startup world for tech. Very connected, but I feel like he has an opportunity to educate the masses, and he's already doing that to some degree, which we'll get into from a startup perspective. But anybody who doesn't know Devin should know Devin. So I'm really excited to get into it, and especially around outbound email, because GroupRaise was literally built on the back of outbound email, cold outbound email. So he did some crazy ninja stuff back before Instantly and Smart Lead and Clay and all the cool kids on the block in the year 2024 came to be. So I guess where the hell do we start? Because as Devin has said, we shoot the shit and have a lot of fun times just talking, during lunches and whatnot. So where do we start? We've had so many conversations.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting moment, like overall. By the way, you're like way too kind. Ben is a brilliant mind who I love chatting with, and we always get to some insight, right? We get to stress test ideas. So hopefully this will be an extension of that. Um, but you're just talking about outbound, right? So like I find it very interesting because if I think back to like the year like 2019, for example, I would say the constraint on successfully doing great outbound was one, like most people didn't understand how to do authentic personalization. It was like a really big problem. So even if you were going to do outbound, you like actually getting something that converted and worked at a small scale, I think still really hard. And then the technical side is also like an order of magnitude more complex, right? In terms of how do you like manage mass personalization, and how do you scale? And so now it's like interesting to see the landscape changing. I see a lot of new entrants, and I'm like a little skeptical in some senses of like, because I know how hard scaling cold outbound is. It's like a whole world, and I think there are a lot of tools that make it easy to start. But now I'm interested to see what the finish is like when you get to that 10,000 a day, 100,000 a day, and maintain. Like we essentially send mm, you know more than 1 million emails a month with greater than 35% open rates across. That's like the low end. That's really hard to do. Uh, so anyway, I'm just curious. I'm curious to see uh, what are your thoughts? I know you're working on the space and there's like lots of new players.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for anybody who's listening, because there's going to be the people that are like super into this, that are in the sales world, and there's going to be the people that are like, what the hell are you talking about? So just to set the stage for this, everyone has heard, I'm going to make a big assumption, but I'm assuming everyone's heard of inbound because it was made famous by HubSpot. And obviously all the content they put out about how do you generate inbound leads through a variety of different channels, whether it's from
Which
just
is great
organic
marketing, by the way.
posting.
Inbound wasn't a thing before HubSpot. They made that as a category and then just convinced everyone on the internet that they should do that so that they could build their business. It's like one of the most beautiful case studies of category creation.
Exactly. And so I feel like outbound in a sense is kind of where inbound was 10 years ago, where outbound is something that has been done from the Stone Ages. I mean, of sales, it's you're cold calling people and you're getting people that have never been talked to before on the phone with you. Now, there's different channels. Obviously, direct mail being the prototypical one that everyone thinks of back in the day. But obviously, with email, that's something that's been happening forever. Every sales guy on planet Earth has sent an email on a cold call basis to some degree if they are in any type of enterprise sales. So this isn't a new idea. I think what's changing it and making it in vogue, or whatever that term is, cool for the cool kids, is that it's now accessible. It's a way of contacting people through cold email, because the laws on cold outreach and email is much different for B2B than it is for B2C. And so it allows us to essentially go and spam the universe with want to, which means we can reach out to
Well,
anybody and
ideally, hopefully we're
everybody
not spamming the universe,
directly
but
to their.
yes. Hmm, hmm.
Ideally not, but that's unfortunately, I think, one of the trends that we're seeing, which we'll get into. But I think that the key thing here is we're talking about cold outbound email. And I think, to Devin's point, is Devin and his co-founder Paul really were at the cutting edge when this all got started for them, well before all these other tools that made it no code. Before, you needed to deeply understand the back end infrastructure and how the whole thing worked, and there weren't these really easy off
By the way,
the
we can't leave out our
shelf
other
SaaS
co-founder,
models.
Sean. Yeah,
Sean,
Sean is an
and to
engineer.
Sean's credit, I hear amazing things about Sean. I haven't actually spent a lot of time with Sean, so that's the only reason I didn't bring him up. But I'm sure he's a killer too.
Oh, he is. Yeah, he is. If we are great whites, he is actually an orca, which means he could actually kill us if he chose to. Oh, he's great. He's really awesome. Yeah.
The one time I had an interaction with Sean was he was teaching me how to use Excel. And I remember just feeling like I thought I was competent with Excel. And then he came in and I was like, okay, I'm just not even going to try it anymore. It's just it was too far advanced. He's like, that's not the formula you use. You need this random formula. So totally.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, these guys were at the cutting edge of that. And so now we're in this weird world where all of a sudden no code's a thing, AI is a thing, and these are disruptors to that space. And it's very easy to get entry access, even if you don't know anything about the technical back end. Now, I'm oversimplifying it, but I think that's the direction it's going. So anyways, just setting the stage.
Well, and so I think the first things is, in fact, like I always think of email as, I mean, it's copywriting in its purest form, right? So a lot of the technical elements are now like leading because they're enabling a lot of folks to come in. But if you want to actually get conversion out of email, I think it's really important to understand like uh, direct response copywriting, right? I don't know, Ben, if you spend a bunch of time in this world. Uh, there's a guy named Neville who has the copywriting course, which is probably where I started many, many years ago. Um, but just like really getting obsessed with having the first line make you read the second line making you read the third line making you read the fourth, like creating these like very slippery slopes um, from the entrance into some sort of action, whether that's booking a call or responding or like whatever you want to do. And as many AI tools as there are out there, I still think in order to like truly build something that's a replicable machine, it's like very, very important to understand the basics of copywriting or direct response copywriting. And so, yeah, I would love to hear how you cut your teeth in that, or if you did, and whether or not you're seeing a lot of folks now who are like getting off the ground who at least have like a base understanding of direct response.
Yeah. So for me, I was, remember back in the day, I was a nonprofit door to door, like telesales guy. So I was like so far away from the marketing world. I remember I'm 35 now. I remember when I got started at the marketing firm before I became a partner of that marketing firm. I didn't know what marketing was. Like I literally walked in the doors and I was like, so what's the difference between sales and marketing? Tell me that. And that's how like little I knew. And so, but as you know me, I was a philosophy background major, and I was very interested in ideas and pretty quick learner, self-starter kind of guy. And so I just started reading books. And one of the book, I got deep into the digital marketer world back in 2015, 2016, when that was coming up. And I subscribed to all of their courses online back when they were coming up. And I found Breakthrough Advertising was probably the big book that changed my life in terms of the Eugene Schwartz, that the mythical book that you can't get for less than $200 unless I think they came up with some type of new offer around that. But yeah, and so the whole awareness scale idea of unknown, known problem, solution aware, problem aware kind of thing. And so I use that core idea guides every single thing I do. And then I think you were the person who turned me on to the letters, the guy from jail. What was his name?
Gary Helper.
Yeah. So I read it. I read that. And his whole advice was, well, go find a bunch of swipe files and read good copy from existing performing ads. And then he said, rewrite the copy and actually go rewrite it. So I did that. I found some articles and and I, now this is years later, I am the world's biggest thief of copy. I just steal copy and I rewrite it. And I then got into the ultimate sales letter or the ultimate sales letter, I think it was. It's the one with Dan Kennedy. So I read that whole book and I wrote a long form written out sales letter. It was like 15 pages and I direct response mailed it to several thousand people in the oil and gas industry. That was like 7, 8 years ago. So I got deep into this, into the copywriting space, and it really influenced the way that I pitch on the sales level. So, and I think that's pretty unique for a VP of sales, but I was fascinated by it just like you are, because it's messaging at its core. How do you persuade? And ultimately, human beings are persuaded through words at the most fundamental level. So you have to understand how those work. And everybody always says in the digital marketing space, the number one skill you can learn is copywriting. So I took it very seriously. I would say you are infinitely beyond where I am at because you do it every day at the email level. But I wouldn't say I'm a newbie either.
No, I mean, and I think even just having like my statement to this next generation, like outbounders, right, is it's very alluring to just like in Excel, build a spreadsheet of your funnel and then, write a number of contacts in the top and then just kind of forecast on the bottom, what you'll get. But the way that actually manifests just by like sharpening the copywriting skill, like you'll get all the tech, all the thing. Like I'm a big believer in um, those things are just magnifiers, right? So you're either going to magnify your shitty copywriting at at extreme scale, or you're going to like take that skill and it's going to get magnified. So um, this there, as much as like you know, there's auto generated copy that comes out of LLMs these days, like still getting that skill to know so that you at least have the eye to select what you want to come in, whether you're actually communicating, I think is like a really, really high leverage skill that I don't think is going away.
So if you could distill copywriting into 60 seconds, which I know is a crazy ass, what would you say? What is copywriting at its essence?
Well, I kind of in the beginning, I alluded to the way I think about it, and I think about it as like, does this line, any piece of line or information draw you down to the next at its like most basic form, right? It should move the like it should hold attention and guide you to want to find out to like, if we're playing poker, to flip the next card. It's just like, oh wow, like this is an amazing hand. And like what's behind those next three cards, right? And so um when you know, I think when you start to understand like what draws the eye, like the human eye, like how do you create intrigue? Like how do you frame um all those things give you the like ability to maneuver human attention to kind of wherever you want to go, to educate, to entertain, to move. So like I think of copywriting as any sort of visual line, because it's also not just the text. It's like your decision around bolding and formatting or lack thereof, or casing, or like creating hooks for the eye, or getting the eye to move from one line to the next and in this like way that is uh, uh, pleasurable for the reader, right?
Mm. And do you have certain resources that you would recommend point people to? Like if you could choose three resources that they could digest to get started. I'm thinking of anybody who's not
Yeah, yeah.
deep
So
in the
so the
space yet.
two, yeah. So that's like so one is the copywriting course by Neville is really good. And he talks a lot about this. Two is there's another program called Copy That, which is very similar, where you're essentially getting great copywriting and then you are handwriting. You're just like literally copying down to paper these really like it's a lot of different things. It's everything from like writings of Benjamin Franklin to um, direct response emails to uh, it's a pretty big range, and it's 30 days. And you get an email every day and you're tasked with writing it. And like as you actually go through that physical act of copying copy, which seems like, oh yeah, I see it, I read it. There is just something like you start to realize like where the pauses are, where the emphasis are, like how to move. I don't know if you've had experience with like actually doing copy work, like copying great copy, like by hand.
Mhm,
I think
mhm.
it's one of the best ways to see what someone's doing and kind of imagine like, huh, like would I put that next line there? Like, why did they put that line there? And kind of, just doing that work is really important. And in fact, like, I think actually in the actually not like the 18, in the 1780s, that's how people learned to write well, which is like really common, which was to find great works and to like copy them by hand. And it's somewhere along the way, like we stopped doing that. But I think it produces, kind of gives you the rules so that you can learn how to break them.
Yeah, I remember in college, it was very lucky. I think this was just like a strike from God, so to speak, where there was a mentor. He reminded me of him quite a bit. A very smart guy, and he was obsessed with words, obsessed. Like I've never. It was like strange. It was like strange. Like let me put it this way: I walked into it was the English department for some type of help desk, so to speak, at the University of Pittsburgh. And I was writing a thesis at the time. You can actually Google Ben Reed BPhil uh, thesis, like 215 pages, probably like one of my more prized accomplishments as an entrepreneur, even though it has nothing to do with business. It was like I went and I had to create this whole thing from scratch. So I was in the middle of my introduction was 30 pages. So I was in the middle of rewriting my introduction for like the seventh time. And I was obsessed. I would work from 7 a.m. till midnight every day at the library. I lived there. I'd always have a like super cliche stack of books right next to me where I was pulling all these sources. There was 14 pages of sources at the end. So just to give you a sense of what I was going through, I was obsessed. And so I realized one of my philosophy professors said to me, he's like, you need to work on your writing. Your writing isn't clear. He's like, I know that you're a smart guy, but your writing isn't conveying your thoughts clearly. And it was kind of like an ego shock at the time. I didn't even think of it like that. And I got A's in all my English classes throughout high school. I thought I did pretty well in terms of my ability to write, but the college professors didn't think so. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go and find a resource, a mentor. So I went into this thing, and I remember I met with this younger woman to begin with, somebody close to my age, and I just felt like it was like my chance to show off. I was like, look at how awesome this is, and look at them, like, and I just wanted to read it and compliment me, and she did, and I felt like, okay, yeah, I know all this shit. What are they talking about? So I went back, and there was this guy, older guy, 60, 65. And he was sitting there and he had a cap on, super informal. And I was like, what's this guy going to teach? Like he looked like some guy you would see on the street. It was like, it was weird. It was like, he didn't look like your typical professor, with polo shirt and everything. And whatever the whole over, whatever the hell you call that stuff. I don't even wear it. So I don't know what the clothes is called. I walked in and the guy sits down with me and he says, okay, pull out your thing. So I pull out this pad of however many pages I had at the time. And I pull off the start, which is 30 pages. And I put it down and I'm super ready for him to compliment me. And I open it up and he looks at the first thing and he takes a piece of paper and he puts it on top, except for the first sentence. And he says, I want you to read this out loud to me. And so I read it out loud. And he goes, why did you use the word, whatever word that was? And I was like, dude, read the whole thing and maybe you'd understand. And he's like, no, I don't care about the rest. I care about this sentence. And I was like, what the heck? So he did that. And we spent a week on that first paragraph. And we spent a month on that first page. It was that intense. It was like an hour a day on a sentence. And the idea that he was trying to convey to me is that words matter. And every single word choice matters. And I remember he came in one day really giddy, and he had this like, it was like agapoly or something like that. It was like, it wasn't a monopoly. It was like some other variation of monopoly. I don't even remember that word at this point. And he was like a kid in a candy store. It was like, he's like, I found this new word and it's so amazing. And this is what it means. And that's how this guy thought. And I think like if I had to embody like copywriting in a person, it would be that guy, like just super excited about that kind of stuff. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at to a degree.
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And it's funny, I think oftentimes when people hear stories like that, or even you talk about, okay, every word matters and we're just going to cut down and look at the first line, like, well, what about, no, it's just like the first line. And that will lead you to think more complex. So like try to use a higher level vocabulary. And in reality, it's like truly about simplifying. It's about like making
Mm.
yourself way more understood. It's about actually not choosing the word that is, to like show your ego and intelligence, but choosing the
He-
word that is like, that makes the idea understood and drives intrigue. That's very often the simpler, not the more complex word.
yeah. And also about the structure of the sentence too. It's like why is the sentence structured a certain way? And how do you continue the first sentence to the second sentence? And same thing in pitching. There was a pretty, I can't remember the guy's name, it's gonna kill me, but a copywriter who's also a guru, very closely tied in with the digital marketing folks, Ryan Dice's group. Can't remember the guy's name, but he was at a conference recently and it was all about copywriting, but for AI copywriting. I went to it in Vegas. The thing that always struck me about him is he's a master at coming across as stupid, like, but yet highly informational and highly insightful. And it's like, and at first I thought he was dumb. I was like, oh, this guy's just too simple. But he's a copywriter, so he's built into he's actually like a lifetime copywriter, And so he has just built this ability in to come across as fourth or fifth grade reading level in his speech, which comes across as like, dude, this guy's sophisticated, but extremely compelling because he understands your messages have to be simple. And I will say I have a problem with that. I mean, I'm pretty good on with like a podcast like this or us shooting the shit. I have a hard time with that, like dumbing it down. But when it comes to sales pitches, I'm actually pretty good at it. Because
Hmm.
again, I pitch to the oil and gas crowd and I'm talking to truck drivers who are middle school educated and I have to convey a value proposition to them, why that thing actually is worth buying, why it's different than the other alternatives. And I have to speak really simply and I have to make it very clear. So yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, it's like an interesting. So I always think about outbound as starting there. And the nice thing about outbound is that if you really get into the data, it is, there's nowhere to hide intellectually. If your stuff doesn't convert, your stuff doesn't work, like it's very, very apparent. And if it does, it's also very apparent. And so I think that's the, um, I always think about like, how do we get as many experiments as possible? And now I don't know how many experiments I've run. I don't know how many experiments you've run, right? Like it's like in the hundreds, right? Or in the
You've done a lot
thousands.
more. You've done a lot
Yeah.
more. I can
Right. So,
tell that.
but, the thing about that is that, um, it, it's a very rewarding, well, I like experimentation. Like that's a first thing, but it's a very, um, if it's working, you will know. If it's not, you won't. And there's not a lot of things where you just get this like kind of raw, unfiltered feedback on the system you've created in like real time, and you can make changes. And then the very next day, you can then see whether you actually learned something that was correct or incorrect, and it's hyper measurable. So, um, that is one of the, I don't know, joys of outbound, right? Like inbound, for example, you have a very long feedback loop, right? From the time your content ranks to like the quality of leads it's like, definitely, there's definitely a feedback loop, but it's months or weeks, um, before you know. Whereas outbound, like we can know in 3 hours, like whether that was better or worse, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
What's also interesting is the ability to get going. And I'm scared of even saying this to people because they're going to be like, well, I'm going to go do that. The ability to get going nowadays is just so much different than any other channel. I think we have a 12-month period here before this whole thing goes to hell uh, because of how easy this is getting. But the ability to write an email, especially with GPTs, if you have some sense of copywriting structure and you have a GPT with you and you get a system like Clay or Instant, or even just Instantly, put aside Clay for a second, which is just a way to warm up emails automatically. You don't have to. In the past, I remember sitting down with Paul again, Devin's co-founder, years ago, and being like, "How do you warm up an email?" And he was like, "Well, you have to start it at a number of sends per day, and then over a period of time, you increase the sends." And I remember literally manually sending emails. Like I was like, "I'm going to send it to my friend," and then waiting for a reply back. And now there's automatic warm up pools through things like Instantly, and I'm affiliated for Instantly. I'll put a link somewhere below,
mhm.
or Smart Lead. And, and so you literally go buy the domains and the inboxes through them. And for anybody who's not, doesn't know what I'm talking about, domains are just like normal, like website domains, like example.com, for example. And the inboxes are the emails that are related. They're called inboxes or emails. They're related to the domain. So you might have Ben at example.com or Devin at example.com or other variations. And so there's best practices around sending. Some people will say it's, 5 inboxes per email. Some people will say three. Sorry, 5 inboxes per domain. Some will say three. I've seen people do crazy things like 30 to one. Like there's the best practices. The way I would suggest at this point with what we're doing, at least with next gen sales leaders, is 3 to 1 on the inboxes to email. I would like to know what your thought is, or sorry, inboxes to domain. Anyways, we're in the weeds. My point is that you ultimately can do this automatically. You can go just buy these things through Instantly rather than going to Outlook or Google and buying these domains and having to warm them up manually. You can literally go push a button, get 10 domains created, and just wait a week. You don't have to send a single email, it automatically warms them up. So that's what makes it so easy to entry. And then you use a GPT with some copywriting and you put together a 3-step sequence. Some people will do 4s or 5s or whatever it is, but whatever your outbound sequence is, and you push go. And it's like it's not like filming a video ad. You have to have editors and post-production and you have to launch it to the platform. It's like you get the copy, slap it in the campaign with a warmed up email, and you go and you get to see these results. So 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also kind of enough rope to be quite dangerous because through the years, um, my relate like so the benefit of large language models is we get these here, but also the challenges that Google's getting quite good at identifying the customers of platforms like Instantly as well, the Instantly of the world, and so you always have to. It's this game of cat and mouse that because the reason why these systems exist, like for example, first principles, like why warming up exists, is because it's really trying to show that it's human beings talking to human beings and that you're facilitating one to one communication, right? And so that's like that's the when these things tend to go wrong, it's when someone operating a system really just embodies the role of system operator and forgets that you're facilitating ideally like what is a very hyper personalized one-on-one interaction at scale. And it's like a slight nuance, it's to like the personalization you use, the way you write the templates, the like, I always ask people, if um whenever I look at someone's cold outbound, I'll ask them to say, if you got that email, would you think that that person sent it to just you? Or can you tell that this email went to 500 people or 200 people? Right. And anything that like any sort of information that you can kind of feel that one will hurt conversion, but two, over the long haul, like Google is really good at looking at everything you do and then coming up with a score of like what kind of behavior this is. And, I think getting into promotions, getting into these other like tabs inside of the inbox is like this really big challenge. So it's this double edged, like it's amazing to get started quickly. But then, if you're really going to get the power out of outbound, really think about first principles, like why do the instantlies exist? Why do these systems are here? And like, what are the underlying models that are being used on the other side to decide where you show up in a prospect's inbox?
Yeah, and I think that for again context for anybody who's not deep in this world, I'm just going to define some terms for people. So when people talk about like infrastructure, they're typically referring to like the domain in the email or the inbox that I described earlier. But then there's also the softwares through which people are now sending it. So that's like your Instantly or your Smart Lead. And these are tools that can provide the infrastructure rather than going again to Outlook or Google separately. You can buy it through them, or you could actually go to Outlook in Gmail and buy it from them, the infrastructure, the emails and the inboxes, the domains, and then import them in. Either way, it's a SaaS opportunity, a SaaS tool, Smart Lead and Instantly. There's a variety of these. Those are just the two leaders in the space currently that allow you to warm up and then actually do the sending and creating the campaigns and monitoring the reply rates and doing a bunch of stuff like that. And they have a bunch of different APIs that you can connect into. But then there's within that world, what Devin's getting at is the reason these tools are helpful is they have, to the best of their ability, created best practices around sending these emails in a way that does not come across as spammy or automated or bulk. And one of the goals of any of these providers is to make sure that your emails, one, are verified. So Instantly, for example, offers a verification service. It's expensive, and so that we use third parties for that we then plug it in. But you need to verify the emails so that they don't bounce, because bounce is an indication of, spamming essentially. And if you go above a certain, like, I think it's, what is it, 2%? What is the rate? 2%?
Percentage if you're consistently sending more than 200 emails with a 2% bounce rate, that's where you can start use every time you do it, you lose domain reputation.
Right. And so the domain can be blacklisted. The emails can be uh, restricted. Like, for example, a client of ours just had a situation where they breached the sending limits on the Outlook for one of their emails. So there's these different providers have limitations. Like if you try to blast through, for example, I have a CRM called Close.io. It connects to Gmail inboxes directly. If you don't have like a SendGrid, another third-party platform that allows you to send bulk emails, you're going to run up against a sending limit for your normal Gmail account, which I think it's 150 per day. And they're just going to turn off that email. You are done until you come off of it. And they probably marked you in some way that's going to impact deliverability. You're going to end up in the spam folders. So there's a whole game being played of like when you send, and I think this comes back to the beginning for Devin's point, is that when you send the amount of emails that Devin's team or any large provider sends, millions of emails per month, you have to be really good at playing the game. So you don't trigger the normal spidey senses of these algorithms, these smart machines that Google and Outlook and all these email providers have put in place to prevent abuse. So we are playing the game of trying to not get caught. And coming back to first principles, the way to do that is to actually send good content, to send not spammy, crappy looking content, which comes back to the copywriting. So anyways, for just to set context, because I can imagine somebody listening to this is like, what the hell are they talking about? That's the game we're playing here. Did you agree with that? Or do you disagree with anything I said?
No, I mean, I think that's it. Um, I would always say like there's the industrial part of the brain, which is kind of like the feed more wood, like that you're just like going to throw the next log on the fire. And it's really, really tempting to just see outbound as this like industrial furnace that you just kind of throw another log on the fire, and the more you do, the more results you get. Um, and I find that
You
it
mean like send another email? Or what do you mean by log on the fire?
Yeah, so send another email or just add like try to send the most contacts possible or try to be a maximalist in terms of, you know, the whenever it comes to email, I always say like the first things first is deliverability because if it doesn't matter how good the copy is, if it doesn't show up in someone's inbox, they're not going to read it. Right. So that's like the first instinct you have to get. And like tools like Close are really great because they send on top of Gmail. And I think Google has self preference for itself. So using a tool that's essentially orchestrating Gmail, you can get, there's a much bigger margin of safety for what you can do and get away with versus when you go to like the worst choice ever is to go and send with like a MailChimp. Um, and the core reason for that is that any service that pulls you in a shared group of IPs, that means that you actually inherit the reputation of everyone else who's using that same IP. And so if it's working for you really well, all of a sudden your conversions can just drop and it's actually from nothing you did. It's from someone else went and spammed on a shared IP in a service like MailChimp. And now your content is getting the same reputation as like whatever first newbie who comes in and uploads, sends there. So, you know, and kind of those beginner tools are very alluring because they're the first search terms you find, same thing with HubSpot, actually. Anything where you're actually on a shared IP, you have to be really careful. That's easy to find in Google because you start inheriting these reputational things. So these are all these like technical elements that I bring up only because the best place I see to find email is like a small cohort, make sure it works at small scale, and then build the infrastructure to scale it up, and just be mindful of that you are scaling this magic that works. It has to work like with a small group of people. It's like more volume won't make it work better. That's kind of my point.
Yeah, it's a good point to bring up because we're coming out of the inbound craze from the mid 2000s through the present day. A lot of people are used to the old school tools like the MailChimp that you mentioned, or even like Active Campaign or any of these
Yeah.
tools that a lot of people are used to, or Infusionsoft. A lot of those tools were really geared towards the inbound crowd of generating leads into the system. And then you build a list, and that newsletter list is then how you follow up and send stuff. Even Klaviyo. Like Klaviyo is the big thing for ecom, which is more D2C, direct to consumer, B2C, whatever you want to call it. But because people hear those tools referenced quite often, and a lot of small businesses rely on them, they go, okay, now I can do outbound with those same tools. And they're fundamentally different tools. In fact, I think that if you try to upload a big cold list to any of those tools, they're going to say, "Hey, did you verify these? Where did you even find these emails? Did they agree to receive your sending?" So you might even be blocked from the get go, and you're going to sit there and go, "Oh, these guys on this podcast said I could do all this stuff," and it's like, well, yeah, you're using an inbound technology to try to do outbound in a way that is fundamentally not the way to do it. And so that's why using the correct tools is important. But I think Devin's point is like, if you really want to do this, actually segues really nicely into the next part of the conversation, which is I don't know when Apollo started, but Apollo was, really one of the leaders in the space because what Apollo did that I think was pretty distinct from the other major data providers. So to break this, let me back up. To send a lot of emails, you need a lot of leads. Let's start there. You need to find a lot of people. And you need their emails to start. So it's not like these tools like Smart Lead and Instantly just have those. So you need to get a list. So back in the day, there used to be these list brokers, and then there was things like Zoom Info, which was the behemoth for the longest time, and there weren't easy places to quickly go find, at least in a non-technical way, a big lead list without spending tens of thousands of dollars a month at scale. And Apollo and a couple other providers started to change that about, I don't know, what, 6, 7 years ago. I can't remember when it started, but they essentially commoditized that entire space where they went and they scraped LinkedIn and a bunch of other sources and made data much cheaper. as a starting point. But then they layered on top outbound email infrastructure that allowed people to essentially do what Devin's team had done before, all through their own proprietary technology, but just at scale immediately. So they could go find the lead list, load it to a campaign, and just click send. And a lot of people were crushing. I know companies that were doing and are doing tens of millions of dollars a year on the backs of Apollo. Uh, in fact, one of my clients was doing that. What we've seen recently is that methodology it's just like any channel. You get saturated. So those lists in Apollo are being reused and reused and reused and reused. And so we're even seeing with a bunch of our clients now that the reply rate is plummeting. So we're seeing, like, it used to be, say, 2 to 3% reply rate, and now it's 0.2% on Apollo. Because again, Apollo says that they're verifying emails. Like, you can click a little box in Apollo after you create a list, only send verified emails. They're not really, it's like false advertising. So they're not doing a good job on that. The infrastructure is, again, completely reused over and over and over again. Not the infrastructure, not the emails, but the actual leads, the lead lists are being reused over and over again. So that we're in the space where the spray and pray approach of, say, 2017, 18 through the present day on Apollos, which is the next variation past day where, Devin's, like, you had to be a proprietary mad scientist back in the early space if you wanted to be in this, and Apollo came next. And now we're at the space where there's the whole clay revolution, which we can get into. But anyways, what's your thought there, Devin? Do you have any thinking around that,
Yeah.
that whole topic?
So this, it's kind of like any channel, right? So any channel, I think, follows the law of shitty click-throughs, right? Which is that a specific way to exploit the channel only lasts for a period of time, and then the channel evolves. It changes, it moves, right? I mean, this happened in Meta. This happened in, look, this happens in kind of any fundamental channel. It's definitely with email. And the challenge with list buying or like using tools like Apollo is that it's so the emails themselves, what ends up happening is that Google, for example, recognizes that many people are sending the exact same set of people. So like in order and sequence, the content, right? And so then they recognize like these set of email address are now associated with a purchased list. And so as that happens, that if you get any sort of repeated segments, okay, great, like 10 people emailed list this week and it had this amount of overlap, then all conversion plummets. And so, if you, for example, get lists, one, obviously you have to verify them. Two, I'm a really big proponent of it's really hard to come back from a reputation of making sure that you there's no world where you think about the sequencing of what you send. Um, uh, because if you get marked as someone who's sending contacts to purchase lists, it's very hard to scale. Your conversion rates drop, 10 times, right? And so it's hard to do that. So I think those types of tools like this will always happen, right? In outbound, this will always happen. It moves from Apollo to now we'll talk about Clay. And I promise you it'll move from Clay to some other infrastructure. But email link is interesting because it's been around, one of the first protocols of the internet, right? So it's like, as a channel, it's been around for so long. And so, it's like kind of, a lot of people think email's dead, but obviously it's still very much alive. But, there's all these caveats, right? So like how you get the actual thought about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. Is that so? You think that potentially with Apollo, the major providers like Google or Outlook, maybe even can sense of those emails that have been scraped through Apollo, that those are somehow tainted in some way, and therefore they're even more stringent upon deliverability to those emails?
Yeah. I mean, I remember when Google started turning on machine learning for deliverability, like it was insane to see the difference between how sensitive in terms of like, um, so before email was segmented into different like inboxes inside of an email, and then moving into like the first rounds of this was like 2018 machine learning. So before LLMs even, like, and Google started trying to identify spam through using machine learning. Um, there are all these inputs that go into those models, and they're very, wisely don't tell you the inputs that are in those models. But those models have gotten better and better and better and better. And so definitely, um, so so pooled IPs, right? So this is another, like, if you have the opportunity to operate on your own IP versus a pooled IP, this is a thing that Apollo does as well. So if you're having similar people send similar contacts on the same IPs, and then that just means you'll inherit whatever the lowest reputation is of that content will come over to you, right, as a sender. So what a lot of it is happening is that somebody poops the pool invariably. So if someone sends high bounce rate from a shared IP to a shared set of contacts, and then that now becomes the inherited reputation. So, you know, um, that all those types of like parts of the game are interesting because typically what happens is that when you're at small volume, let's say you're sending 1,000 emails a week, which to me is small volume. I mean, it's all relative, but like, you know, you can find something that works, and then it's an order of magnitude harder when you get to like, you're like, this is great, we're killing it. Let's get to 5,000, and then when you go to 5,000, you um, you try to just scale like the 3 email addresses, for example, you were using when you had 1,000, and then that's like where the system starts to break, or you forget to verify one of the batches of contacts in in um in Klaviyo or in whatever tool, and you just send a big bat, you send 1,000 leads that weren't verified, and that takes you down. So like those are and then once you get into a blacklist, it's really hard to get out. And so, you know, these are all of just the hard one. Like I say this because we've fallen in all these traps. And I'm like, I know many people will continue to fall in these traps. Even though these tools are really amazing to help you, it's like, uh, it's great to have a seatbelt. You still can't crash the car, you know?
Yeah, I do wonder. I wonder to what degree Apollo's in trouble, because I don't understand to what degree their business is driven by the email side or the data side, and if it even matters. I mean, and it's kind of shocking to me given the funding that Apollo has, and how they're the leader. They were the leader in the space, and now all these other tools are coming up that are kind of disrupting. Uh, because you would think that like the instantly smart lead Tango would, if I was Apollo, I might just go buy them because I'm like, look, you guys have figured out the deliverability to a better degree. But I don't really, to be honest, I don't understand what is the distinction between Apollo's software abilities versus Smart Lead or Instantly. I really don't. And why is it such a different? Because clearly we can see, at least on our side, that setting things up through Instantly is just better.
Yeah, way
And
better.
I
Way,
don't
way,
know
way
that.
better. So do you want to nerd on the mechanics or not?
Yeah, I like give me, because I'm interested. I'm sure that if I'm interested, other people will be interested. I'm gonna sit back in my
So
chair and
like
get educated.
yeah, so a tool like Instantly or any sort of roll up tool, right? Essentially what's happening. So there's two big things that are important to keep in mind. So one is like, how long has a domain existed, right? So whenever we're giving reputation, if uh so let's do the inverse. Imagine you're a Nigerian scammer. Okay. This is just your goal. You are going to send old people emails, try to get them to give you your social security number, and you're going to go fish. And Google is chasing you to stop this, but you've gotten your list, working on it. So what ends up happening is that you have these set of emails that they're sending, they stop working, you get blacklisted. So then you go buy new emails and you send them. So any new email that gets high volume quickly, like a new email address that was just registered on the open internet, which is very easy to see, like anytime a domain is registered or who owns it, and here and how long it's been created. Um, that is it's like in the penalty box, right? So it's like, hey, like there's very few legitimate new businesses start and then instantly have 10,000 people to message who legitimately opted in, who they're legitimately communicating with. That's like a sign of a purchase list or spam behavior. So, you know, so the first things first is like, that's why you want to have a set of domains. It's like this, like whatever the Chinese proverb, when's the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago? When's the next best time today? So you need to have a bunch of domains that are available, that have been purchased and existed for a long time before you actually use them. If you get into the situation of where you need to buy a new domain and start scaling it right away, you can't do that. Like Google will punish you here. So that's like the first. Then the second is just like what kind of actual activities happening in that inbox. So if we just think about like what is a healthy, like if I'm sending someone who I really met in person, I met you at a coffee shop and we caught up and we're chatting about business and I send you a proposal. Well, that person would probably open the email a couple times, right? Actually respond to the email, would, do all there's a lot of like easy behaviors that Google can see or any ISP can see around like what is like organic behavior around a real email that was sent between a human versus how many autoresponders replied as a percentage, right? Of in the first 30 days of the existence of an email, what a percentage of the behavior was like automated versus like organic, right? And what goes in the organic bucket and what goes in the automated bucket is not publicly shared, but there's some estimation of like what is this. So the instantlies of the world have figured out how to make inboxes look organic, right? And by doing that warm up process, which is sending emails back and forth between multiple accounts and making that look like there's organic human interaction that's happening, even though it's automated. And this is why I say like Google, I promise you, has a team that's trying to identify every instantly customer to to then re then to update their domain score, right? To show that this is likely not organic, right? Because that organic versus inorganic bucket is a dynamic machine learned um, thing, right? And so what they're doing
Wait, just
now
to
is like
stop you
this.
there for a sec. So you think it is highly likely that Instantly and Smart Lead are on the radar of a Google team that are actively trying to counteract their.
They will be if they're not already. It's just a matter of time, right? Like,
It's like I get a call from the Instantly CEO, and he goes, "You know, your podcast ruined my business. But you told Google about us. You know, I know that's a joke, but
oh, I don't
can
think
you
we
imagine?
would tell Google about you, but what I'm saying is, like there's a this is an arms race of humans versus machines, right? Like we know, everyone knows that tons of people have been armed with, artificial intelligence, right? And that there's all this infrastructure to try to get that to look organic. And both sides of this have weapons, right? Like this is kind of like back when one side had bow and arrows and the other had machine guns. Machine guns won, right? And then we've like pushed, this state of war, and that's what's happening at a platform level, right? Right now, I'd say instantly is giving you a machine gun, right, and it's working, but that could easily be nerfed. So this is just like understanding what the service is actually doing for you, right? And so if you have domains, which I'm sure they probably have purchased a ton of domains themselves, and they and you can actually like kind of benefit from their warm up cycle and the fact that the domain has existed and can help you like think through this. You asked me before about how many emails per domain. Like I don't know, there's lots of different ways you can think about this problem, but fortunately for us from like GeoCities back in the day, like if you think about who sends the most email notifications, it's like LinkedIn. So I always look at what LinkedIn is doing because LinkedIn is very good at messaging millions and millions of business people and maintaining their position in the inbox. And so they use, for example, lots of subdomains instead of existing new domains, and each individual subdomain has its own IP reputation. So, when you buy those original domains like that you have, it's also important to create like a huge army of subdomains that sit on top of those, so that
Can you give us an
you can
example
have,
of a domain versus a subdomain for people listening?
yeah. So like a domain would be example.com and a subdomain would be email.example.com,
Mm.
right?
And
So
then the
adding,
email itself would be ben@email.example.com.
that's right. That's right.
Okay.
So each individual subdomain gets its own IP and reputation. I like this book.
I don't know why that
It's
happens. So anyone listening, there's like every time I think I put up a peace sign on the camera, it makes balloons show up. So
yeah, I think you're on a Mac
yeah.
something, but so these tools, right? So these tools are doing that for you. So they're going through the warm up process of creating like what seems to be organic behavior. And so by the time when they pass it to you and they say, okay, you send your campaign, you are now like Google has said, or they have given you the idea that doesn't think you're a Nigerian scammer, that have legitimate communication, and then ideally you're going to pick that up, they're passing the ball to you, and you're not going to poop the pool, right? So there's two big bifurcations of services. So services where there's shared IPs, so everyone, aka everyone's behavior, like IPs are literally fiber lines that, like we have a warehouse that has um uh I think 12 IPs that we've owned for years as like a literal backup to our broad system, which is like a set of specific numeric codes that are unique, that build a reputation that will run through actually how information is from. So if you are, it's cheaper, like from a cost perspective, like you actually have to buy these from um, telecommunication providers, right? So there's a physical cost for maintaining an IP. So it's much cheaper, like as a service. You're incented to want to have as many of your customers on the same IP because it drops down your cost, right? If you're like an instantly or not instantly, actually, more like uh, Apollo, right? So there's this like inverse from a cost perspective. You want to cluster customers, but from a deliverability quality perspective, it's actually best for each of your good customers to have their own IP. Because if you send crap on your own IP, then you just, kind of got it on yourself. And so whenever you're
So what
doing
does instantly do
configurations,
there?
so it depends on how you're sending, right? So if you, for example, are using close.io, which sits on top of Gmail, right? Like Google, and this is why I talk about like Google gives itself some nepotism, because
Mhm.
Google has their own IP infrastructure that then they like Google's not going to be like they're just going to look at how your individual emails are performing, and not really going to deal with this um, IP issue, right? Because you're sending from Gmail, right? And it's anytime you're sending from a service like a Mailchimp or uh, a HubSpot or an Apollo, right? Those folks are actually maintaining their own, or Hatchback or whatever. They're maintaining their own set of IPs that have their own reputation and health, right? And so, um, as a, as an overall, depending on if the service allows you to, like for example, SendGrid allows you to purchase your own IP and manage it, right? Like so, you have to buy it; it's an add-on, it's an extra cost, but you then now know your domain reputation and you keep it, right? And so there are services that allow customers to get access to their own shared, or maybe even be pooled or control the number of people in the pool you are versus not. And so if, for example, like on Apollo, your customers, do you know whether they're on a shared IP or they have their own unique individual IP assigned?
I don't know. That's I'm flying blind when it comes to like these platforms' technical background. Just so you know.
Yeah. So platforms that don't allow you to do that, you have this inherent risk that some other player on your IP will lose reputation and that will come and affect your business. And so that's like when I think of the Apollo, so like the Apollos of the world, how they manage that problem again, it's a short term, it's more profitable for them to pool customers on an IP and not worry about it. But then long term customers, they run this like risk that long term customers notice that their performance is reducing and all the things they try don't work. And then they go to an instantly and then they remore up a new domain and it works. But if you come back and then you use that domain on Apollo and you inherit that reputation, you're going to get into this problem. So these are just different um, um, considerations, if you will, to when we think about email, right? And how you're going to approach this problem, again, how you're going to approach these tools and like how you're going to build
Mhm.
your business. So I'm a love, like, I actually think these tools are awesome and you should use them. Like you should use LoanUp.io, you should use Instantly, you should use these tools. But if you're going to build, it's just kind of like if you're going to build your business on Facebook ads, like you do have this kind of inherent platform risk that there could be a change in the algorithm, or there could be a change, right, in these other forces that'll come and affect you. And then you have like it's important to understand that how the way these systems work so that you can not just be stuck, but you can go find another service provider, or you can find your own like IP chain, or you can kind of hedge against getting taken down by some of these technical issues.
Do you fundamentally understand the difference between Apollo's tech and say an Instantly or Smartly's tech?
I won't speak to that at the moment. I think I have to look at their different offerings and like what each one provides. So like give it a fair assessment. Um, but in general, you have this, who warms up your inbox, who actually then sends your email, like in what ISP do you send on top of and like maintains like your identity. And then you have like, where do you get your leads from? And then your lead verification process. No one, the number one thing that I see as well is like people think, is a lead valid or not? Yes or no. Well, actually, when you look under the hood, it's more of a 0 to 10. How confident are we that a lead is valid? Than it is like this is a valid email or this is not a valid email. And there's a whole kind of subset of that. And different tools, for example, have different layers of validation, and all those things combine in your stack to create like your overall infrastructure and what you're using to solve that. So where do you buy your domains? How long have they been? You know, um, where is your ISP? Like where do you warm up your own boxes? How do you technically send, track conversion, do all this good stuff? Um, and so it's a lot of information. We're just
Well,
super
I
duper
wonder, I
up.
mean, I do want to get Instantly CEO and Smartly CEO and all these other CEOs on the podcast because I really want to understand like what do they see as their unique selling proposition and value prop relative to each other. And it is a little surprising to me, like, is the is Apollo suffering right now predominantly because of the lead quality in their sending is like inherently tied to the lead quality, and therefore it's not so much a sending infrastructure problem so much as it is a lead quality problem, and that it's being abused. So it's like that 1-2 punch of too many people sending the same email, sending the same emails, and then also on top of that, it's just so accessible to all their customers and they're growing so rapidly that people are just abusing it. Is there any like hypothesis you could have as to why, say, it Instantly or Smartly would
I would
perform
say
better?
I
And I'm
don't
sure.
know the answer. So I don't know the answer, but I my hypothesis would be that one of the other big value props that a lot of these tools are showing, like you talk about Clay, is this dynamic copywriting. Copywriting, that skill was a bar, right? And it's not a bar that you necessarily have to face with an Apollo, because you kind of bring your own copy. But I think these other tools that are now giving you personalization without the work of having to come up with your own copy, that's a very um, it's a very alluring value prop, and it
Mm.
drops the bar a ton to get started and to like maintain. Like it's kind of like writing your own newsletter every week or writing content every week is a slog, right? It is super a slog. So I think these tools that essentially help you do a lot of that personalization, and then like anybody who's not gotten results, like it's pretty fast for you, like if over a 2 week period, you went from having, let's say 30, 40% open rates to now 18, 12% open rates, you're going to start looking for an alternative very quickly because you like the ability to churn a customer is quite high if performance suffers for any period of time, right? And now the number of alternatives, I think, to an Apollo is growing. And typically when you get on any sort of new service, it's going to perform better just because it has less users. And so this is this
Mm.
problem with like being a mass market email, cold email provider. I don't know if you can really do that.
Yeah, it's
It's
an
kind of an
interesting idea.
existential
So it's,
question.
yeah, so it sounds like there's a couple things you're saying. So one is the newer players inherently don't have the big problem of saturation. Number two is maybe there is some secret sauce we don't know about that they're doing that gives them an edge. I know they're using like AI warm up and a bunch of other stuff there that is a little mercurial to me. I don't really know. So I'll have to follow up on that. But the other thing is that with these other tools that Apollo fundamentally doesn't enable is this ability to tie into these third party systems like Clay, these ability to do trigger based and AI based emails off of the triggers through what they call clay tables, and to have very dynamic copywriting, which because it's dynamic and because it's unique, it probably doesn't trigger as many of the threat detection mechanisms from the big providers. Like we were talking about the other day, is like if you send a gazillion of the same email, that's a lot different than a gazillion contextual, individualized, personalized emails. So I think that's a thing. And also, just to your point, coming back to first principles around the copy, is that like if you are able to send very uh, personalized and contextual, highly relevant emails to people, you're probably just going to get better results anyways. Less people are going to mark you as spam, so you're going to not be alerted to the systems. You're actually just going to get more opens and replies because it just seems better for them. What a shock! And so all of those things kind of play a part in the lift overall. So it seems like the biggest mover though is the ability to contextualize and personalize emails at scale is the big game changer. Is that fair assessment?
I think so. And I kind of, what I was saying before about, I don't know if it's possible. Like, I definitely know you can, like, SendGrid is a great example of being able to send transactional emails at scale. And, there's lots of, you can send email at scale.
What do you mean by
Within a certain,
transactional emails?
so we have to think in general, we have transactional and marketing emails. So transactional that's like, hey, your purchase went through, or hey, it's a product notification about some organic activity that happened between a product and a user. That's transactional email, right?
Mm.
Um, and then marketing email is kind of the solicitation for sale of a non-customer, or even or of an existing customer, where the action wasn't something that was driven by a user's behavior that caused you to reach out from the product. It was driven by maybe some behavior that's outside of your product, right? So this is like if we just like try to find some sort of line, and like players like SendGrid, you call SendGrid marketing, but again, ideally it's to your customer, and transactional, which is like kind of product generated. And the question is like whether or not, like, for really cold outbound to be super effective, you need to maintain really high open rates. And it becomes exponentially harder to maintain that as a service as the market adapts. Like, as you're the Apollos of the world and you become the consensus way to go, that means it's easy for Google to know, oh, well, most people who send this type of email are sending it from Apollo. So let's try to find everything that marks an Apollo, or most people, right? And then you start to have people who make mistakes. And so there's this question of like, can you have a mass, like, like, I think Clay has a really interesting shot, to your point, around mass personalization, of being able to really make sure no two emails are the same and send that to individuals. But then you have this other kind of challenge, which is if they're not the same, then it's hard to replicate results as well. So that's like the
Mhm.
double-edged sword of
Right. Well, that's actually a good point. Is like you said, you like to test, and it is like this interesting idea of there's kind of two competing principles there. There's one of like, in order to test, you need an A and a B. You need an independent variable. And you need the
Yeah.
controls across it, right? So like you need one
Yeah.
email and then there's like the same exact email and maybe the subject line has something different or something. Whereas like if it's
Yeah.
fully personalized, it's like, well, that generally speaking seems better overall for the customer. And it seems like the way that you guys, again, tell me if I'm completely off here, the way that you guys have played with that world of both A/B testing and hyper personalization is by doing a bunch of market research, kind of like you would do with Clay, but doing a bunch of market research and then essentially like Clay again, building tables of all that data you collect about a ideal prospect and then using merge fields. But rather than doing fully automated AI email from those merge fields and from the merge fields just being like captured information variables around a type of client. So for example, they're down 5 miles from Frank's Deli, or they're the guy that likes to, I don't know, he posts every single day at 2 p.m. I don't know. Any data you can think of it. Now we're in the data analytics, data scraping space world, but you're collecting a dossier, a set of information on somebody in a set of, think of it like an Excel table, a bunch of different columns of like cat lover, and what he does on Sundays and that kind of stuff. But it sounds like you guys don't rewrite the emails every time. You have templates that you A/B test with different merge fields, and then you're using the subject line. Whereas like the Clay version of that is much more like literally rewrite the email every single time based upon the same data. Is that right? Did I capture that correctly?
Well, so we do both, interestingly enough, and it depends on scale. And it's an odd merger, right? Of of for example, prompting a specific area with a understanding of what goes in a template. So if you're going to send very small volume, you can easily just A/B test classically, where repetition doesn't matter. When you start getting into really high volume, that's when you have to kind of give up your ability to control what the copy is for variety and personalization. And like managing that like predictability of results and what works with kind of free flow so that it maintains personalization is this very, high,
Right.
there's tension in finding
Exactly.
that balance, right? And I think anybody who's going to really scale this now to tens of millions or hundreds of millions of revenue on this channel, you want to be thinking as you go on that journey about how you're going to play in those games. Like, what's your strategy, right? Um, yeah. By the way, Ben,
I
unfortunately,
mean,
I have to run, which
oh,
is
you
like
do.
this is
Okay.
the
Yeah. No
I
worries.
know
No worries.
we
We will certainly have you on for a second episode. So we will wrap it up here. How can people reach you on, outside of this channel?
I'd say LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great place. So just Devin Baptiste. When you search it,
Just connect
there's
with you
maybe
there.
two, but you'll recognize the space. And yeah, GroupRaise is the backdrop. So please connect with me on LinkedIn.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for listening. We're signing out here from the Next Gen Sales Leader podcast, and we will see Devin on the next version. Part two, Devin and email. But appreciate you having you on, Devin, and we are signing off here.